Hello wrestling fans, I am the ProWrestleMachine. And this is June 10, 1996 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. UFC drops super fights. WWF very upset with Scott Hall's Nitro performance. Momentum swings in ratings war, more. By Observer staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228. June 10, 1996. In the wake of the Dan Severn vs. Ken Shamrock match, SEG has decided to drop the superfight as part of its UFC PPV shows for at least the remainder of 1996. The decision was made because of the general reaction to that specific match, and because for the most part, the superfight matches, because of the skill level involved, haven't been as exciting to the casual spectators as hoped for. The original plan was to not have a superfight in July, at least partially because it was assumed that Shamrock would get past Severn, and Shamrock, because he's expecting another child that month, had decided it wasn't the time to be training for a major fight. The plan was to have the superfight title defended in September, but after the disappointing 0.6 buy rate for the May 17 UFC show, about 140,000 buys and $1.26 million company gross on the event, figures held down because between Cablevision in the US and Viewers' Choice of Canada not carrying the show, nearly 10% of the PPV universe didn't have the show available. The decision was made to go to a tournament format for at least the time being and concentrate the remainder of this year to putting on 3 strong tournaments. September would have been the only superfight for the remainder of the year because the December PPV show would be Ultimate 2. There is a chance the superfight format may be revived in February 1997. From a budgetary standpoint, cancellation of the superfight saves the company at least $75,000 per show in purse money, although the theory behind having it is that it would draw enough viewers to pay that figure many times over. Cancellation means that SEG is questioning that theory. From an advertising standpoint, having a strong main event allows the promotional focus to be put on something specific, and in the past, marketing of matches such as Gracie vs. Shamrock and the first Shamrock vs. Severn drew the company's biggest buy rates. The drop in buy rate for the most recent show, which was the lowest figure for a UFC besides the first 2 shows when the concept was in its infancy, was attributed some to uncertainty over whether or not there would be a show. Studying market by market apparently told a story that in many markets this show did stronger than the previous show, but in markets where there was a lot of publicity about the court case and that the show might not take place, that the buy rates were way down. UFC promoter David Isaacs said that this has shown them that the theory that any publicity is good publicity doesn't seem to hold water when the publicity concerns courts deciding whether or not to ban an event and creating confusion as to whether or not it would take place, that people simply make other plans. In addition, because of the controversy, SEG has had to tone down its advertising so as to de-emphasize the violence and emphasize it as an art and skill form, and the bottom line is that isn't nearly as effective when marketing to the general public. The change in format effectively puts the 3 biggest stars UFC has created, Severn, Shamrock, and Royce Gracie, on ice at least for the time being. Isaac said that he felt confident that Severn would return in December to defend his Ultimate Championship. However, it is very doubtful Gracie would enter a tournament format, and Shamrock has made it clear he won't enter a tournament. It appears likely Shamrock will concentrate the remainder of 1996 on fulfilling his contract with Pancrase, and he has indicated his final Pancrase match will be December 15, 1996 at Tokyo Sumo Hall, with a report in Tokyo Sports on June 4 that it would be against younger brother Frank. In one of the most tumultuous weeks in the history of Titan Sports, it had a PPV nearly destroyed by Mother Nature. It had its own spoof comedy segments knocking its competition turn into a strong angle for its opposition, and it had the man scheduled to be its PPV main event heel for at least through the end of the summer give notice, toning down what had been up to that point considered one of the company's most creative storylines in a long time. Striking back against the worked interpromotional angle started 1 week earlier by WCW on Nitro. Vince McMahon, in what appeared to be a prepared lawyer's statement, said on the June 3 Raw show that Diesel and Razor Ramon were no longer part of the World Wrestling Federation, but that they intend to portray themselves as the stars they once were, and were participating in a ruse that they're still part of the WWF when they are under contract with a rival wrestling organization. It then encouraged fans to call their 900 number or log on to America Online for more details of the ruse perpetrated by Diesel and Razor Ramon. In addition, WWF released a legal letter sent to Scott Hall which it informed Hall they believed he was infringing on Titan's intellectual property rights by still portraying the Razor Ramon character in WCW, and that Titan would be withholding all future payments, future merchandise checks, and the May in Your House PPV payoff along with other monies not yet paid him. They owe Hall until the matter is settled. The WWF's online message stated, in an effort to further blur the lines between Ted Turner's wrestling organization and the World Wrestling Federation, Scott Hall, portraying the World Wrestling Federation character Razor Ramon, recently appeared on World Championship Wrestling television programming. The World Wrestling Federation wants to make it clear that there is no agreement with the Turner organization. Nor will there ever be. Therefore, the following letter was sent last week to Scott Hall in an effort to make him aware of the copyrights in which he, and World Championship Wrestling, infringed. Dear Mr. Hall, this letter will serve to put you on notice of your deliberate infringement of Titan's intellectual property rights in connection with your appearance this past Monday on the WCW's Nitro show. Having reviewed the tape of your appearance, the text of the various statements made by you during your appearance, and the explicit references to past and ongoing storylines of Titan Sports, it is obvious that you are attempting by your appearance to suggest to the consuming public that you and others from the WWF were now going to be appearing on Turner Networks and WCW programming as part of some interpromotional matches. The entire theme of the program, buttressed by WCW personnel afterwards, was that WWF wrestlers were going to be wrestling WCW performers, and that you were leading a group of WWF talent in that effort. This is, of course, completely false and was intended to confuse the viewing public. To further this attempt to mislead and confuse the public, you stayed completely within the character portrayal of Razor Ramon, a registered trademark of Titan Sports, during your appearance on Nitro. Indeed, both you and WCW personnel never even mentioned the name you intend to wrestle under at WCW, choosing instead to tell the audience they knew who you were. You dress like Razor Ramon and utilize the Hispanic accent given to you by Titan as part of the character portrayal. Titan, of course, has no objections whatsoever to you portraying a new or different character devised either by you or the WCW, but will vigorously exercise its rights in connection with your attempt to pawn off or suggest to the consuming public that your WCW appearances are in the character of Razor Ramon, in the capacity as a WWF wrestler, or as part of some interpromotional matches involving WWF participation. Accordingly, this is to advise you that Titan has exercised its rights under the contract it had with you and will be withholding future payments from you until this matter is further clarified. Titan further reserves all rights it has to take any and all further action as may be appropriate. The letter seemed to make no difference to WCW and Hall, which continued its planned angle with no backing down on the June 3 Nitro show. It's believed to have been the first time since the War of 1984 that a promotion has called another promotion's angle a ruse and tried to hurt a competing group's top angle on its own television show. However, on the Raw show that aired the same evening, WWF appeared to have backed down on its top company angle, the Shawn Michaels Davey Boy Smith Diana Smith storyline. McMahon quietly said the lawsuit involving the Smith family and Michaels, which was announced at the PPV show 8 days earlier, was dropped and changed the heat to teasing a new prospective lawsuit between Clarence Mason and Gorilla Monsoon. The latter storyline seemed to have been pre-planned since Mason had already shown up in a neck brace, sling and walking with a cane at the May 26 PPV show in Florence, South Carolina while announcing the Smith family lawsuit. By television on May 28, McMahon had gotten the word that Smith had given his 90-day notice to WWF, allowing him to leave the company when his contract expired at the end of August. Unlike previous notices with Hall, Kevin Nash, and Ted DiBiase, this wasn't the case of another performer giving notice as a prelude to signing a contract with WCW. Apparently Smith gave notice according to one source as a way to renegotiate his contract before it expires, and according to another source, simply to get McMahon's attention because of several things going on that he was unhappy about and had complained about to no avail. There are no imminent plans of Smith going to WCW, nor at press time had anything been worked out in regard to staying with the WWF after the end of August. McMahon and Smith talked on June 1 and were scheduled for a meeting about his future with Titan Sports on June 6, at which point Smith and Titan are both expected to be clearer about his future plans. Titan's plans were to use Smith as the headlining heel and keep his feud with Michaels in the top spot on every PPV show through SummerSlam, although adding other participants to the feud along the way. Smith's giving notice is said to have nothing to do with his and the Hart family's unhappiness with the way they perceived Diana Hart Smith was going to be portrayed in the company's top current wrestling angle. Smith wrote the letter giving notice, something he'd apparently been seriously thinking about for months before the PPV match with Michaels, but the telegram was not received by the Titan offices until May 28, so the PPV match had nothing to do with giving the notice. However, both Michaels and Smith were said to have been furious about how the match turned out because it didn't come anywhere close to the standards either had set for themselves going in and were frustrated a rematch wasn't scheduled for the impromptu May 28 Make Good PPV show. According to the versions of the story we received, Smith and the Hart family were under the impression the conclusion of the angle was going to be that it was Diana Smith who had come on to Michaels, that he rebuffed her, and that she was making up the story and filing a lawsuit as a way to get revenge for being turned down. They were under the impression that the conclusion of the story in exonerating Michaels in the lawsuit would be that a surveillance camera tape would air, which would supposedly have been taped at the PPV show in Omaha where this all started. No segment had actually ever been taped in Omaha, nor were the participants in this angle supposedly told of the conclusion when the angle first was started, that would show Diana Smith coming on physically and aggressively to Michaels in a darkened area backstage. Stu and Helen Hart and Bret Hart were all said to have been upset with how they believed Diana was going to be portrayed in the angle, since her television character is herself, and it's not someone who doesn't exist using a pseudonym like Sable or Sunny, obviously playing a character that they aren't. The other version of the story was the entire situation was a misunderstanding and that the idea of the angle was never to end up that way, and that when the angle was completed, the heat would be put on Jim Cornette and Mason and not on Diana Smith, and that nothing any stronger than what had already aired would ever be done involving Diana Smith. There had also been talk during the week that Owen Hart, who was also scheduled for a major push this summer as his tag team with Smith would be moved to more of a headline status, would also leave. However, he had not given notice, and there have already been negotiations going on for him to sign a new contract with the company. In the midst of all this controversy came the most catastrophic PPV in the history of the WWF, almost completely due to circumstances beyond the control of the company. A downpour in Florence, South Carolina caused the power outage for more than 1 hour of a 2-hour show. When power was restored, Michaels and Smith went on for their PPV grudge match, which was nowhere close to the quality everyone expected from the match due to a number of circumstances, all related to the power outage. The finish that aired, the double pin, was the planned finish for the PPV match. However, neither Michaels nor Smith supposedly knew that their match in Florence was airing on the PPV and thought they were simply doing a house show match and would be doing a different finish than planned. The real match would take place 2 days later as part of the Make Good show. At one point during the match, the signal got to referee Earl Hebner, who informed both wrestlers that the match was airing, that there would be no rematch on Tuesday and they were to change the match, shorten the match to fit into the PPV window, and go back to the double pin finish. By this time they had already done a number of restolds building to a longer match. Because of the power outage, the crowd live wasn't as responsive as expected, and Michaels by this point already knew the match was below par and apparently felt it was beyond redemption. In addition, some of his concentration on the match was taken away by a heckling fan at ringside, and his swearing at the fan and calling her a fat cow while being held in a headlock by Smith wound up turning other fans in her ringside section turning on him. This only frustrated him more, with him eventually exploding at the guy who cued the music in a post-match outburst that was aired originally but was later edited out of the replay. It was a two-way street, as Smith was also apparently frustrated by everything that was going on. Both Michaels and Smith were said to have been upset with the quality of their match and the decision not to have a rematch on Tuesday. McMahon was obviously under considerable pressure with a blank screen during more than half the time he had allotted for a PPV and felt it necessary to give the fans, who were so patient, the main event they had paid to see. However, in hindsight, it appears he made the bad call. There was almost no interest in the replay showing on May 28 because there was no main event match. The billed main event match was already seen by everyone who cared as a below-par match with a poor finish, certainly nothing worth paying $19.95 to see again when you could simply call the cable company up and get a refund, particularly since a large percentage of PPV viewers watch in groups and the Sunday group in most cases wouldn't be able to get together again on Tuesday night. Even that situation was chaotic, as some companies offered full refunds, and others, such as DirecTV, only would issue $10 refunds to those who complained, which due to circumstances beyond the control of the WWF, left a lot of people with a bad taste regarding WWF PPV events. The double pin idea was to set up the King of the Ring rematch, and having already done that, the idea apparently was that the double pin result would become obsolete in core build-up if there was a subsequent match with a different finish. This led to considerable requests for refunds and mix-ups between wrestling fans and cable companies. While no figures are in at press time, word almost across the board indicated a buy rate for this show far lower than for any show in either WWF or WCW history. Our own poll responses were down 70% from the lowest purchased PPV shows in WWF history. Coming on the heels of working with the national government of North Korea to create the two most attended pro wrestling shows in history in April of 1995, Antonio Inoki tried once again to become the one thing that eluded himself in one of the most successful wrestling careers of all time: become a wrestling star and major political player in the United States. During his full-time active career, Inoki tried several ways to make himself, the former king of pro wrestling in Japan, into a prominent superstar in the United States. First, in 1973, he bought the National Wrestling Federation, a regional promotion in the Buffalo/Cleveland area, so he could gain recognition with a major U.S. promotion as a world heavyweight champion. A few years later, his company managed to put together the most publicized wrestling event of that decade, the 1976 fiasco of a fight against Muhammad Ali. If Ali would have cooperated and done the job, Inoki would have become a worldwide superstar. As it was, Ali didn't do the job, and Inoki came out of the event to the American public as a sideshow character with a pre-Jay Leno jaw, who was involved in a cartoon performance that was an embarrassing part of the career of the most famous athlete in the world at the time. Later, in late 1979, Inoki was able to maneuver himself right into the World Wrestling Federation Championship in an interesting footnote in pro wrestling history that has been erased from history by the WWF in the United States. During that period, he was able to frequently work in Madison Square Garden defending what was billed as the World Martial Arts Championship, and even though his matches were always portrayed by the Japanese press as a big deal in the United States, the truth was Inoki never got over to any significant degree in the US, and at the age of 53, semi-retired from the business that put him on the map, Inoki as a promoter attempted to be the statesman and politician that could make all the bickering wrestling companies in the world, for one day, get together to promote peace and racial harmony. And he attempted to send the illusion back home of him still being, to this day, one of the great martial artists in history, as he, at the age of 53, got in the ring and held his own in a match that featured two of the greatest martial arts stars on the planet, Dan Severn and Oleg Toktarov, along with his longtime rival, Yoshiaki Fujiwara, a protege of Karl Gotch, long with a reputation in Japan as being the master of submission holds. As has usually been the case during the career of Inoki, both in and out of the ring, the public appearance and the actual reality were often two entirely different stories. Not to downgrade Inoki at all as an athlete. He is in amazing condition both when it comes to physique and reflexes for his age, and is a well-schooled technician when it comes to the art of submissions. Inoki, working with the Japanese-American Sports Federation based in Los Angeles, wanted to put on and headline the biggest wrestling show ever in the United States, at the Los Angeles Coliseum, a 100,000-seat stadium, with every major league wrestling federation in the world invited. The idea was to do on an international basis what Tarzan Yamamoto and Weekly Pro Wrestling pulled off successfully the previous April at the Tokyo Dome before 60,000 fans. Unfortunately for Inoki, the government of the United States, unlike in North Korea, wasn't looking at pro wrestling as a means to gain international publicity for its country. And the wrestling companies in the United States, a country that has virtually nil interest in wrestling on a worldwide scope, weren't nearly as willing to be put on stage in a situation where they weren't going to have complete control, and where their top stars would be competing for the spotlight against some of the best talent in the world, something many promotions in Japan relished the opportunity to do in April. The World Wrestling Federation, after Linda McMahon first wrote a letter accepting the invitation, made it clear they weren't going to have anything to do with the show. Because Inoki is the spiritual leader of New Japan Pro Wrestling, a company with strong business ties with World Championship Wrestling, that group for political reasons was willing to participate, but only to a limited degree, or sending talent to the show, but not of doing any promotional work for the show, which was never mentioned on any of their telecasts, even the local syndicated show in the Los Angeles market. Where the organizers deserve political points is their ability to bring AAA and EMLL together, two organizations with a promotional feud so bitter and so dirty that it makes the WCW-WWF squabbles seem as serious as two kids in a sandbox arguing over who gets momentary possession of a pail. Of course, New Japan was involved, since it was an Inoki production, but the only other Japanese offices represented were Pro Wrestling Fujiwara Gumi, through its namesake leader who has a decades-long business tie to Inoki, and Michinoku Pro Wrestling, through its president the great Sasuke, who currently holds New Japan's junior heavyweight title belt. The first of what Inoki hopes to be many World Wrestling Peace Festivals, to portray himself as the ultimate political leader in the pro wrestling world, took place on June 1st at the Los Angeles Sports Arena, when the idea of running the show at the Coliseum had to be abandoned as a concession to reality. In the wake of numerous problems, lack of internal organization, lack of publicity, and lack of promotional help from the involved organizations, the show is far from a financial success, as only 2,513 fans paid $64,965 for an event where expenses, when it comes to travel, organization, putting on the show, and numerous banquets, had to be astronomical. The total in the building was somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000, as there were 3,700 freebies out, but not all of them came. The promoters had realized it wasn't going to be a box office success, and internal problems with the companies involved kept it from making PPV. So the next step is to recoup costs by putting together a home video and a cable television special from the show. But the end product in the ring, amidst some rocky parts, was a success. It was not the show of the year, even for the United States. As an overall show, it would rank behind all but one or two of the AAA shows held over the past 3 years in the same building. But the consensus from the locals was it was a far better house show than WrestleMania, something I totally agree with, which played the same market 2 months earlier, and it was better than many, but not all, the PPV shows from the major US companies over the past few years. From a match quality standpoint, there were no real surprises. Given the length of time allotted, all the matches were about as good as one would have expected going in. The only major surprises was the triangular match that far exceeded expectations, and the main event, where Toktarov's first venture into pro wrestling was praised by almost everyone. Toktarov was far from a polished worker, as his background includes no pro wrestling school training, but he was far more effective than most men in their first match, even after lengthy training by reputable wrestling schools, and many who have been wrestling for quite some time. If the goal of pro wrestling is to fool people into believing that a work is real, then Toktarov, along with Inoki and Severn, deserve credit because they had a large percentage of a very divergent audience believing that this was the one real match on the show, even though it was just shooting-style pro wrestling that slightly resembled a cross between Pancrase and Woofy. The crowd itself, small as it was an interesting mix. With no promotional work done by WCW, and AAA no longer having local broadcast television in the market, the two groups that should have drawn the lion's share of the fans and almost all the casual fans didn't dominate the audience. Instead, it was a group that appeared to be about 1/3 Anglo, 1/3 Japanese Americans and Japanese tourists, 1/3 Mexican Americans, nearly all of whom would qualify as their culture's equivalent of hardcore fans. This created interesting crowd reactions during the show, and the most diversified wrestlers really didn't know which style to work. Crowd reactions were more along the lines of a quiet but respectful Japanese audience, mixed in with some catcalling and heckling Anglo-Americans, except during the AAA matches when the Mexican-American fans totally took over the building with their fervor and heat. While a lot of the Anglo-Americans were respectful, there were more than enough that weren't that made a lot of Anglo-Americans at the show embarrassed for the behavior of their third of the audience as a group. The only match that seemed to get over huge with every block of the audience was the Rey Mysterio Jr. and Ultimo Dragon vs. Psychosis and Heavy Metal Witch, which was almost universally considered the best match of the show. But it appeared the crowd was into most of the matches, but more in a Japanese way. The only match with a strong traditional American-style face versus heel heat was Pero Aguayo and La Parca vs. Cibernetico and Pierroth Jr., which had the most intense heat of any match on the show, even though technically from an execution standpoint may have been the weakest match of the card. From my own standpoint, having been to shows with all the various groups involved, it had the feel of a New Japan house show with good matches and some good foreign talent underneath, and the AAA and WCW matches on the show seemed more like when wrestlers from those companies would be on a New Japan tour as opposed to seeing either group in their element. Solid work, clean finishes in every match. But it didn't come across as a New Japan mega show in that the matches themselves didn't have meaning or importance to the crowd that one would get for the main events on a built-up major show. The show opened with the announcement of the officials representing the four major companies. Jose Payanono, the booker for EMLL president Paco Alonso didn't attend the show, was announced first, no reaction. AAA president Antonio Pena was announced to a polite reaction. Then came a loud chant of Bischoff sucks as the WCW executive vice president was announced. New Japan president Seiji Sakaguchi was announced last, and he got a strong pop. The American fans then really laid into Bischoff, who eventually started leading the Bischoff chants cheer until a Mexico chant started as Craig Pittman US Ultimo Dragon Mexico, which is strange since he's Japanese both in gimmick and in reality, and Manabu Nakanishi, Japan. WCW's Kurosawa came out as flag bearers for the represented countries, and all three national anthems played. The crowd was totally respectful when the Japanese national anthem was played, which is something that wouldn't be expected at a typical show in the United States. 1. Pittman, WCW, beat KGB in 6-11 with the Code Red Cross Armbreaker submission. Both were booed coming out, Pittman by the American fans because he represented WCW. KGB, local wrestler Tom Howard, was booed by the Mexican fans because he was a headliner with AAA until recently as a Russian heel. When Pittman did his one-arm push-up spots, he was booed. Pittman threw several suplexes, some good, others a little sloppy. The two didn't work well together. Dud. 2. Jim Neidhart pinned Bobby Bradley Jr. in 5 minutes with a power slam. They did a lot of big man, little man stuff. Crowd wasn't into this match. Highlight was Bradley, who had a recent tryout tour with All Japan, taking a nice bump over the top rope. 1 quarter. 3. Akira Hokuto and Lady Apache, EMLL, beat Bull Nakano and Nefli, AAA in 8:24 when Hokuto pinned Nefli with a Northern Lights bomb. Nakano got a huge pop, one of the biggest of the entire show. Surprisingly, Hokuto, who was wearing an awesome ring costume complete with her Reina Jubuki mask, she worked the match as a masked Mexican-style wrestler, didn't get much of a reaction. Crowd was dead early until Nakano did her nunchuck spot. Nakano's knee, which has been bad for years but was really torn up last November on the WCW Nitro broadcast, is in real bad shape and it showed with every spot. Hokuto is nowhere close to what she was in her prime either. This was a good match, although nowhere close to the 2 tag matches in WCW in November involving Hokuto and Nakano. The Mexicans were okay, but they are nowhere close to the caliber of the Japanese. Nakano got some nice pops doing her monster spots, including suplexing Hokuto and Apache at the same time. Finish saw Apache to a top A, followed by Hokuto doing her flip dive off the top. Hokuto got in the ring and finished Nefli off with the bomb. 4. Chris Benoit pinned Alex Wright in 9:54 when Wright tried a sunset flip off the top rope, but Benoit grabbed the ropes to keep from going over and held onto them for the pin. Benoit got a big response from both the Anglo and Japanese contingents, while Wright got no reaction except for a few boos by the Anglos, who booed everyone from WCW except Benoit because they saw him as either a New Japan wrestler or ECW alumnus. Not much crowd response, but the two worked together as well as almost any wrestlers on the show. Benoit, who was in Japan for the top of the Super Junior tournament, flew in for this one match before flying back to Japan, put on a good performance, but neither did any crazy or killer spots. Wright, who for his age 20 is the best young wrestler working full-time in the US, was heckled by Anglo fans with Bischoff's butt-buddy type of comments even as he was putting on a very good performance, which made the Anglo fans look really trashy to the Japanese fans, particularly since the guy they were blowing out was having such a good match that they weren't noticing right in front of their eyes. 1 quarter. 5. Rey Mysterio Jr. and Ultimo Dragon beat Heavy Metal and Psychosis in 11:40 when Dragon pinned Metal after a tiger suplex. The ring introductions, in Spanish by Arturo Rivera, got a tremendous response. This was the show stealer. The four just did one great move after another from start to finish. All the dives, acrobatics, high risk and spots that take nearly flawless timing to not screw up that you'd expect from all four. Only one spot missed the entire match, when Heavy went to jump up to the top rope from the mat and do a moonsault, which he was to miss, but the unfamiliar ring made him slip off the top. But he recovered and landed on the middle rope and did the moonsault. But he landed on his head and looked like he hurt himself, but he got up and didn't miss a spot the rest of the match. Mysterio Jr. did a Silver King Tope con Hilo and a Hurricane Rana while standing on the top rope onto Psychosis on the apron, with both going to the floor. Psychosis, wearing a new ring outfit, did an over-the-top Tope while Dragon did a flip dive. Finally, Mysterio Jr. tried an Aussie moonsault, but added to the move by doing a full flip, hitting the move perfectly but doing a number on his knee and the landing on the floor, and was limping badly when he got up. Naturally, he was fine and doing everything in sight the next night in Tijuana. All four then did the chorus line of raising each other's hands as the crowd gave all four a tremendous response. 1 quarter. 6. Lex Luger pinned Masa Saito in 5:53 with an inside cradle after Saito kicked out of the forearm shot. Luger got 60% boos while Saito got 70% cheers. Crowd, even the Japanese in this case, booed the finish big time. In useless trivia, both Luger and Severn were born on the same day and each turned 38 the next day. 3/4 of a star. 7. Negro Casas pinned El Hijo del Santo in EMLL's top singles feud match in 5:54 with La Magistral Dandana, in a major surprise. Surprisingly, Casas didn't get much of a response for his intro. Santo got only a polite response for his intro, but once the match began, a loud Santo chant started. I guess due to political problems, the ring introductions were done in English rather than have AAA's Rivera do them in Spanish. Both Pena and Bischoff left ringside as this match was going on, with Bischoff never to return and Pena not returning until the end of the show. Very smooth action, but the match was a disappointment because it was too short. Santo did a nice Tope. 8. Atlantis and Dos Caras and Hector Garza beat Silver King and Dr. Wagner Jr. and Grand Marcus Jr. in 10:35. Even though Garza is the most pushed babyface in EMLL, neither he or any of these wrestlers got much of a response. It was clear the Mexican-American fans were into AAA but really didn't care about the personalities and angles within EMLL. However, the work in this match was very good and brought all three versions of the crowd into it through work. When Atlantis did the spinning backbreaker on Marcus Jr., who weighs about 315, he sold it as if he'd blown out his knee. The best action was Garza versus Silver King, who is usually a babyface but worked heel in this match, with fast-paced well-execution lucha spots. The ref screwed up the Silver King dive by being in his way, but he did the move anyway. Garza has got the matinee idol looks, the physique and the ability to be a superstar anywhere in the world. Garza wound up with a bloody mouth courtesy of a stiff super kick by Silver King. At one point Marcus took a big bump and it sounded like a shotgun lariat because the ring broke. Two guys had to go under the ring and hold the broken part up using their feet for the remainder of the show, which must have been a killer when the Giant was in there. There were some messed up spots in the final minute which took the match down a tad. At the finish, Garza did the screw plancha, which was the move of the show, on Silver King. Atlantis used a plancha on Wagner, and in the ring, Karas pinned Marcus with a flying body press. 1/4. 9. Tatsumi Fujinami beat Black Cat, New Japan, with a cross-arm breaker submission in 5:15. Fujinami got a big pop from the Japanese fans coming out. No reaction from the crowd to this match, which was mainly mat work, but both are solid workers and it was well done, but not the least bit exciting. 1/4. 10. Pero Aguayo and La Parca beat Pierroth Jr. and Cibernetico in 9:38 when Aguayo pinned Pierroth after a shoulder block off the top and a senton. Aguayo got the biggest pop of anyone on the show, both coming out and throughout the match. Match had excellent heat but poor execution. Aguayo's work has gone noticeably down this year and Cibernetico is still awful. They worked hard but everything they did was one step slow. However, Pierroth Jr. is an excellent heat-getting heel. Spots were being botched like crazy. At the finish, Parca leapt off a chair into a springboard plancha onto Cibernetico. He then put Cibernetico in a chair outside the ring and did a tope onto him. After the match, all four got a huge ovation and they held each other's hands up as in the previous AAA match to a big pop, but this time Pierroth cheap-shotted Aguayo and ran away. It wound up backstage with Aguayo beating him up and running his head into a wall. 11. Conan won a triangle match over Chris Jericho and Bam Bam Bigelow in 7:41. Bigelow got the biggest pop of the three coming out, which was a surprise considering Conan's popularity in Los Angeles, but the Japanese went nuts for Bigelow, who was a New Japan superstar who hasn't been on Japanese television in a few years. This was a surprisingly good match in that none had ever worked with any of the others, and you had a major style clash with Conan and Bigelow. It had great heat and the crowd was chanting for Conan, particularly against Bigelow. Bigelow was pinned at 4:51 when he German suplexed Jericho, but Jericho got his shoulder up and Bigelow didn't. Very flat finish. No doubt Bigelow was thrilled at doing the finish in a match pipelined straight to Japan where he was a superstar, getting pinned by a mid-card junior heavyweight small promotion guy in Japan. What kept him cooperative is that it was somewhat of a New Japan show, and he's looking to get his old job back there. The finish killed the heat momentarily. However, Jericho and Conan traded big moves and near falls the next 3 minutes, which got the crowd back before Conan got the pin using a Splash Mountain power drop. 1/4. 12. Jushin Liger pinned Great Sasuke in 12:47 with a Liger bomb. Sasuke didn't wear the IWGP Junior Heavyweight title belt, nor was he announced as champion. He was announced as being 235 pounds, which is a big laugh. Liger got one of the biggest reactions on the show, but Sasuke didn't get much of a reaction. They started slow working the submissions on the mat. Then they got up and traded big moves and near falls very similar to their Tokyo Dome match. The difference is that this match was 7 minutes shorter, so it wasn't as good as the Dome, even though it was in many ways similar. Sasuke did a dive high over the top rope with a flip. Liger did a nice plancha off the top rope. Liger used a superplex off the top into a broken ring. Highlight of the match was Sasuke on the top rope leaping to the floor with a flying side kick, which is totally suicidal because there is a guarantee of a terrible landing on your hip no matter what. Sasuke went for the Tiger Suplex, which is the move he beat Liger with to win the IWGP Junior title, but Liger got away and hit him with a palm thrust and a Fisherman Buster. After the match, Ultimo Dragon came to ringside to challenge Liger to a match. 13. The Giant pinned Sting in 5:09 in a non-title match, which made no sense since Giant went over clean with the choke slam. The Japanese fans cheered Sting huge during his entrance, but the Anglos booed him, so it was a mixed reaction. Giant got no reaction from anyone, although the Japanese seemed wowed by his size. Too short and there wasn't much to the match. 14. Antonio Inoki and Dan Severn beat Yoshiaki Fujiwara and Oleg Toktarov in 9:15 when Severn made Fujiwara submit to an armbar. Inoki got the second biggest reaction on the show behind only Aguayo. Everyone knew who Severn and Toktoroff were, but nobody knew exactly how to take them, as they received mainly polite applause. Tank Abbott was watching the match from the stands, and a Tank chant had started, largely from his personal entourage. Most memorable point in the match was Toktoroff, when wanting to tag in, held his arm up like a first grader wanting to get the teacher's attention to answer a question in order to get Fujiwara's attention. These four had worked the match out the previous Wednesday night at All Nations Center in Los Angeles, so it wasn't bad at all even when Toktoroff was in. In some ways, Toktoroff's stuff got the most interest because it all looked like a shoot to the fans even though it wasn't, and the most heat was Inoki versus Toktoroff. At one point Severn went for a German suplex on Toktoroff, who naturally didn't go with the move, and it made for a clumsy landing by both of them. It's hard to rate this because it looked more like UFC than pro wrestling, but people seemed to like it. The match was a lot shorter than planned at 20 minutes, and the finish came out of nowhere. From a strict pro wrestling standpoint, it was a 1-star match, but based on what it was supposed to be, it was closer to a 3-star match. Inoki gave Fujiwara 2 enziguris, and tagged Severn, who immediately took Fujiwara down with kind of a weird throw and put him in the submission. The fact that it was Severn who scored the win on Inoki's own show tells you how highly Inoki must think of him. After the match, Inoki got in the ring with the officials and wrestlers from all the companies except WCW, for political reasons, for a closing ceremony in which Inoki thanked everyone for attending in English, and got a big pop again. Bill Apter then presented Inoki with a Lifetime Achievement Award for being one of the most legendary figures in the sport's history. The night before was a banquet involving most of the wrestlers and officials involved with the show and the companies. The WCW wrestlers weren't there, they didn't arrive until the next day, although Bischoff and Sonny Ono were. None of the EMLL wrestlers were there either, as they used the trip to Los Angeles a day early as a chance to pick up extra paydays working the Friday night lucha shows both in the area and in Tijuana. We figured it was just as well as the last banquet, which involved both EMLL and AAA wrestlers, wound up with guns being pulled and punches being thrown. The heat between those companies was evident, particularly since the AAA wrestlers like Kanan and Aguayo came in early and did lots of promotional work, while none of the EMLL wrestlers did any promotional work, and it doesn't take much for heat to explode in that wrestling war. However, in an effort at civility, Pena, AAA Booker Juan Herrera, who has been both Booker and arch-enemy of both AAA and EMLL at different times in this war, EMLL Booker Jose Painono all came to a press conference earlier that day together, which would be the equivalent of McMahon, Jim Ross and Bischoff all attending a press conference together. The biggest celebrity announced as attending was Muhammad Ali. This was not announced to the press or something to get attention, as no pro wrestling outsiders were even at the banquet. Ali wasn't there, and an announcement was first made that he was going to be a little late. Then came word from the hotel that a fax came in from Ali, who was suddenly taken ill, but he wanted a speech read. The speech was far too deep and too lengthy to have been written by Ali, mainly talking about his lifelong friend Inoki, how the two had freed the hostages in Iraq, how the two had used their sports fame to promote peace and harmony around the world, etc. In the speech, Ali claimed he wasn't there because of a prior commitment, so in WCW storyline type fashion, the illness excuse was ruined. Different guys were announced and introduced, and it seemed among the wrestlers, the guy who seemed to be the most respected was Severn. The most unintentionally funny part was when one of the officials talked about being fortunate enough to have 2 great Russian amateur sports stars, Toktoroff and KGB, who is an LA area wrestler who did a Russian gimmick. KGB was almost red-faced with embarrassment about being asked to stand up and be mentioned in the same breath as Toktoroff as Russian sports stars. Some of the foreign wrestlers after the show remarked how surprised they were to see the crowd reactions to the WCW wrestlers, and how the WCW wrestlers, who theoretically should have been the stars of the show since it was the US and they were the only promotion involved that had any significant television exposure in Los Angeles. And also how a top company in the US came off looking from a competitive standpoint minor league when it came to ability, with the exception of Benoit and Wright, as compared with all the Mexican and most of the Japanese wrestlers on the show. Virtually everyone agreed that Mysterio Jr. and his match were the show stealers, and that of all the companies, AAA came out looking the best. After the show, Inoki and most of his New Japan contingent left for Mexico City to put together the first of what is planned to be 3 World Wrestling Peace Festival shows in 1997. The first is planned for May 1, 1997 in Mexico City, with later 1997 shows tentatively planned for Havana, Cuba and/or Peking, China and/or back in Los Angeles. The Japanese magazines, in order to protect Inoki's image, reported the crowd at a respectable 8,400 and reported how Inoki's match was successful in that it exposed the American audience to a style altogether different from the American gimmick-style wrestling. Doug Boddy from The Howard Stern Show was the timekeeper. Timekeeping isn't a job that under normal circumstances is going to hurt a show, but in this case it took the show down. He didn't respond to the referee's cues to ring the bell at the right time. Apparently due to numerous circumstances, the momentum has switched once again in the Monday night ratings war. With WCW debuting its 2-hour format on May 27, the WWF's Live Raw coming a day after a PPV show that created tons of confusion and curiosity but left viewers flat, drew a 3.3 rating and a 5.0 share with Vader vs. Ahmed Johnson as the headline match. The 2-hour Nitro averaged a 2.8 rating and 4.6 share, 2.7 for the first hour and 2.8 for the second hour, with Sting vs. Steiner as the main event plus a 1.2 replay rating. Coming on the heels of the Scott Hall angle, WCW rebounded on June 3 with a 3.0 rating and 5.0 share to Raw's 2.3 rating and 3.6 share. Nitro Replay did a 1.1 rating and 2.7 share. WCW's hourly breakdown was 2.8 for the first hour and 3.2 for the second hour, so in the head-to-head battle, WCW won by nearly a full point. 1 week, or 2 weeks when results conflict, is far too early to make any generalizations out of these numbers, even though this industry these days is built on Tuesday afternoon generalizations about trends that change every week. However, for TNT, the additional hour is already a huge success because Nitro's first hour is doing approximately double what Thunder in Paradise was doing in the same time slot. Updates on the various PPV shows in June and July. WCW has changed around its lineup for the June 16th Great American Bash PPV in Baltimore. Complete lineup as it stands will be the Giant vs. Lex Luger for the WCW title, Steve McMichael and Kevin Green, managed by Randy Savage vs. Ric Flair and Arnold Anderson, managed by Bobby Heenan. Conan defends the U.S. title against El Gato. It'll be a small WCW jobber under the hood such as Pat Tanaka or Jerry Lynn. Sting vs. Steve Regal, Diamond Dallas Page vs. Marcus Bagwell for the Lord of the Ring deal, Chris Benoit vs. Kevin Sullivan Falls Count Anywhere, Dean Malenko vs. Rey Mysterio Jr. for the Cruiserweight title, John Cena vs. Big Bubba, and Rick and Scott Steiner vs. Scott Norton and Ice Train in a match where there must be a winner. I'm not sure why the original Sting vs. Conan match was changed, however Page vs. Great Muta was dropped because New Japan didn't want Muta to put over Page, and the subsequent Bootyman vs. Page may have been dropped because there were those who we can only speculate about didn't want Bootyman to put him over either. Actually with Bagwell, it's a lot better match than with Bootyman anyway. We don't know anything about the July 6th Bash at the Beach PPV in Daytona Beach other than the 6-man match with Kevin Nash and Scott Hall and probably Lex Luger as the third man. Rumors of either Ted DiBiase or Jeff Jarrett being the third person don't appear to have validity because DiBiase isn't going to wrestle at the present time and Jarrett's WWF contract won't expire for a few more months, against Sting and Randy Savage and a third person, likely being Ric Flair. Hulk Hogan returns for the August PPV in Sturgis, South Dakota against either Hall or Giant. The WWF King of the Ring PPV lineup on June 23 in Milwaukee, which is nearly sold out, will consist of the 8 matches all listed last week: Shawn Michaels vs. Davey Boy Smith for WWF title, Goldust vs. Ahmed Johnson for IC title, Smoking Guns vs. Godwins for tag titles, Undertaker vs. Mankind, Ultimate Warrior vs. Jerry Lawler, and the 3 King of the Ring matches Vader vs. Jake Roberts and Steve Austin vs. Mark Merrow, with the winners meeting in the championship match. That will be followed by an In Your House on July 21 in Vancouver, BC, with a likely main event of Michaels and Johnson vs. Smith and Owen Hart. 6 of the 8 names are finalized for the July 12th UFC tournament in Providence, Rhode Island. Of the 8, there will be 3 returning fighters: Don Frye, Gary Goodridge, and Mark Hall. Also confirmed are Brian Johnson, a top heavyweight in judo from San Jose, Frank Loebman, a former European kickboxing champion who is now in his late 30s, and John Campatella, a 245-pound Kempo karate fighter who is said to also be strong on the ground. The other 2 names in the bracketing should be completed within the next 2 weeks. One of the leading candidates for the final 2 spots in Tom Erickson, who is one of the 2 or 3 best amateur freestyle wrestlers in the country right now, and who is being trained for UFC by Richard Hamilton at Grand Canyon University in Phoenix, who also trained Dan Severn for his last 2 fights and Don Frye for his UFC tournament victory. The 4 alternates in the tournament will be pro wrestler Geza Coleman Jr., David Hood, David Barry, and Todd Butler, the latter 3 of whom are mainly stand-up martial arts fighters. Mark Schultz won't be available for July because he had a wrestling camp commitment that conflicted with the show. Schultz hasn't indicated to SEG one way or another whether he would return, but a spot would be open for him in September. Tank Abbott will likely be brought back for the September tournament. As far as Pancrase is concerned, the second PPV, called The Brawl in Budokan, is June 14th, which is the tape of the May 16th live event at Budokan where Boss Rutan beat Frank Shamrock to win the King of Pancrase Championship. The show will once again be priced at $9.95 and Ken Shamrock and Bruce Beck will be doing the announcing. Those who have seen the tape have said this show will be far superior to the first PPV because of better match quality. The third Pancrase PPV, which will be entitled Kings of Pancrase, which will be a best of tape, is set for August 18th. We also have Triple Mania updates. Triple Mania 4B will take place at the Plaza de Toros in Orizaba, Veracruz on June 15th and have a double headliner of Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Juventud Guerrera. This should be Guerrera's first match back as he's currently out of action due to a fractured ankle, with each putting up their car, and a Parejas Increíbles match with Conan and Pero Aguayo and Pierre Roth Jr. vs. Cien Caras and Killer and La Parca, managed by Janet. The remainder of the show will be a lumberjack match with Octagon and Ultimo Dragon and Hong Kong Lee vs. Los Villanos, Mascara Sagrada Jr. and Tinieblas Jr. and Blue Demon Jr. and Halcón Dorado Jr. vs. Los Payasos and Caras La Momia, which is a setup for the main event of the third Triple Mania, El Mexicano and Torero and Salsero vs. Los Destructors, and opening with a 10-man with Los Cadetes del Espacio vs. Quarterback and Duende and Ravana and Black Cat 2, formerly Marimoto, and Kanaya. The third Triple Mania will be June 30th at the Zapopan Arena in Guadalajara, headlined by the first ever Four Masks vs. Four Masks match inside a cage with Sagrada Jr. and Tinieblas Jr. and Demon Jr. and Dorado Jr. vs. Payasos and Caras. Results. May 25th at Ekaterinburg, Russia, rings 6,570, Wataru Sakata b Alakine Mikhail Kochikin b Krostov, Gregory Bekshev b Mitsuya Nagai, Vladimir Kurimenchev b Dick Frey, Volkan b Hans Nyman, Andrei Kopelev b Bart Vale, Yoshihisa Yamamoto b Bitsade Ramaji, Nikolai Zuev b Willie Williams. May 26th Asbury Park, New Jersey, New Jack Championship Wrestling, Supernova b Nomad, Derek Domino b Rocco Dorsey, Stevie Richards b Ace Darling, Rockin' Rico b Ubas, El Puerto Ricano, Lucifer b Magic, Misfits b NC-17, Raven b Mikey Whipwreck, Virgil b Ghetto Blaster Core. May 27th Hakata Star Lanes, FMW, 2500, Hideki Hasaka b Tetsuhiro Kuroda, Bad Nurse Nakamura and Crusher Matamari and Shark Tsuchiya b Aki Kanbayashi and Kaori Nakayama and Megumi Kudo, Ricky Fuji and Horace Boulder and Hisakatsu Oya b Nanjio Hayato and Koji Nakagawa and Katsutoshi Niyama, Headhunters b Haido and Wing Kanemura, World Brass Knucks title, The Gladiator b Super Leather to win title, Street Fight, Masato Tanaka b Mr. Pogo. May 27th Shimono Seki, Big Japan Pro Wrestling, Ichiro Yaguchi b Satoru Shiga, Crusher Takahashi b Masahiko Kochi, Hack Myers b Seiji Yamakawa, Sabu b Aquarius, Barbed Wire Board Street Fight, Yuichi Taniguchi and Kendo Nagasaki b Shoji Nakamaki and Axel Rotten. May 28th Nagano, New Japan, 3600 Sellout, Akitoshi Saito and Kengo Kimura and Kunyaki Kobayashi b Yutaka Yoshi and Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Osamu Kido, Jerry Lynn and Dean Malenko b Emilio Charles Jr. and Franz Schumann, Black Tiger b Viano 4, El Samurai b Wild Pegasus, Jushin Liger b Norio Oniga, Satoshi Kojima b Osamu Nishimura, Yuji Nagata and Kazuo Yamazaki b Shinya Hashimoto and Shinjiro Otani, Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Masachono b Junji Hirata and Kensuke Sasaki, Michiyoshi Ohara and Akira Nagami and Tatsutoshi Goto and Shiro Koshinaka b Riki Chashu and Keiji Muto and Takashi Izuka and Tadao Yasuda. May 28th Hanamaki, All Japan, 1500 Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton b Yoshinari Ogawa and Kentaro Shiga, Dan Crawford and Doug Furness b Brian Diet and Manukia Mossman, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momoto b Ryukaku Izumida and Haruka Eigen and Masafuchi, Gary Albright and Giant Kimala 2 b The Patriot and the Lacrosse, Steve Williams and Johnny Ace b Takawamori and Jun Akiyama, Mitsuharu Misawa and Kena Kobashi and Satoru Asako b Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Tamon Honda. May 28th Tampa, Florida, Southeastern Pro Wrestling Federation, Strychnine d Johnny Attitude Jim Magnum b Bill Payne, Chris Nelson b Del Apollo Jimmy Del Rey b Jumbo Barretta, Manny Fernandez, Not Original, b Pepe Prado DQ, Freight Train Freddy b Cuban Assassin DQ. May 28th Greenville, South Carolina, Southern Championship Wrestling, 318, Johnny Dollar b Butcher Blackwell, Cruiser Lewis and Nikki Freebie Roadhogs, Nightmare and Russian Assassin b US Express DQ, Max Miles b SWAT, Wahoo McDaniel b Desperado DQ. May 29, Dalton, Georgia, WCW Saturday Night Tapings, 1300 WCW TV title, Lex Luger b. Dick Slater, Bootyman b. Mark Kyle, Ric Flair and Arnold Anderson b. Steve and Scott Armstrong, Kevin Sullivan b. Al Phillips, American Males b. Pat Tanaka and Kurosawa, John Tenaker Big Bubba, Diamond Dallas Page b. Cobra, Scott Norton and Ice Train b. Bobby Eaton and David Taylor, Sting b. Johnny Grunge, Craig Pittman b. Barbarian, Sullivan b. Rick Fargo, Prince Aokia, Rocky Aokia b. Gambler. May 30th, Takaoka, New Japan 1850, Shinjiro Otani b. Yutaka Yoshi, Franz Schumann b. Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Black Tiger b. Tokumitsu Ishizawa, Dean Malenko b. Norio Onaga, Jushin Liger and El Samurai b. Villano IV and Emilio Charles Jr., Masachono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito b. Akitoshi Saito and Kunyaki Kobayashi and Kengo Kimura, Keiji Muto and Junji Hirata and Osamu Nishimura b. Yuji Nagata and Osamu Kido and Kazuo Yamazaki, Michiyoshi Ohara and Akira Nagami and Tatsutoshi Goto and Shiro Koshinaka b. Satoshi Kojima and Takashi Iizuka and Kensuke Sasaki and Riki Chashu. May 30th, Ofunato, All Japan 1450, Mighty Inoue b. Masao Inoue, Lacrosse b. Monokia Mossman, Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton b. Kentaro Shiga and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi, Ryukaku Izumida and Haruka Eigen and Masafuchi b. Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota, Tama and Honda and Takao Omori b. Dan Crawford and Doug Furness, Johnny Ace and the Patriot and Steve Williams, Brian Diet and Giant Kimala II and Gary Albright, Mitsuharu Misawa and Kena Kobashi and Jun Akiyama b. Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Yoshinari Ogawa. May 30th, Tokyo Korakuen Hall, Tokyo Pro Wrestling, 1750, Akihiko Masuda b. Toryu, Brasso de Oro and Brasso de Plata b. Astro Jr. and Shocker, Shigeo Okamura d. Kishin Kawabata, Gecko and Sakikage b. Takeshi Sato and Hiroshi Itakura, Masashi Aoyagi and Abdullah the Butcher b. Mr. Pogo and Masanobu Kurisu, Tarzan Goto and Mr. Genasuke Great Kabuki and Daiko Kubo Benkei. May 30th, Gifu, Big Japan, Alcone b. Yosuke Kobayashi, Yuichi Taniguchi b. Satoru Shiga, Aquarius b. Masahiko Kochi, Ichiro Yaguchi b. Crusher Takahashi, Sabu b. Hack Myers No Rope Barbed Wire Street Fight, Axel Rotten and Shoji Nakamaki b. Kendo Nagasaki and Seiji Yamakawa. May 30th, Akita All Japan Women, Genki Misai b. Yuka Shina, Yoshiko Tamura b. Yumi Fukawa, Takako Inoue b. Saya Endo, Manami Toyota and Kaoru Ito b. Yumiko Hata and Kumiko Makawa, Tashio Yamada b. Marco Yoshida, Asia Kong and Atsuko Mita and Shaparita Asari b. Kyoko Inoue and Tomoko Watanabe and Ri Tamada. May 30th, Kingsport, Tennessee, Southern States Wrestling, 126, Gorgeous George III, Rob Kellum, BTCB Man, Wolfman and Ninja Turtle b. Bubba and Mike Cooper, Vladimir Koloff b. Danny Christian, Frank Parker and Roger Anderson b. Scott Sterling and Dan Cooley, Bo James b. Jimmy Valiant, Ricky Morton b. Manny Fernandez. May 30th, Shelbyville, Tennessee, All-State Wrestling, Brawler Rex b. Lonnie Lane, Tony Falk b. Brawler Mark, Larry Valentine b. Tom Burton, Ashley Hudson and Kid Sensation b. Strictly Business, Gypsy Joe and Glenn Mullins b. Keith and Ken Arden. May 31st, Tampa, WWF 2763, Bushwhackers b. New Rockers, Justin Bradshaw b. Barry Horowitz, Savio Vega b. Steve Austin, WWF Tag Titles, Godwins b. Smoking Guns Corp., Mark Marrow b. Hunter Hurst Helmsley, Jake Roberts and Ahmed Johnson b. Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith, Undertaker b. Mankind, Johnson b. Vader, WWF title, Shawn Michaels b. Goldust. May 31st, Toyota New Japan, 4150 Sellout, Kunyaki Kobayashi and Akitoshi Saito and Akira Nagami b. Yutaka Yoshi and Yuji Nagata and Tadao Yasuda, El Samurai b. Jerry Lynn, Norio Onaga b. Tokumitsu Ishizawa, Shinjiro Otani b. Villano IV, Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Black Tiger b. Dean Malenko and Franz Schumann, Michiyoshi Ohara b. Hiroyoshi Tenzan, Osamu Kido and Junji Hirata b. Masachono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan, Satoshi Kojima and Kensuke Sasaki b. Kazuo Yamazaki and Takashi Iizuka, Osamu Nishimura and Keiji Muto and Riki Chashu b. Tatsutoshi Goto and Kengo Kimura and Shiro Koshinaka. May 31st, Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania, ECW, 325, 2 Cold Scorpio 1 Battle Royal half, Bad Crew number 1 b. Bad Crew number 2, Mikey Whipwreck b. Stevie Richards half, Ron Harris b. Don Harris Dud, New Jack b. Brian Lee D. Von Dudley b. Bubba Ray Dudley, Pitbull number 2 b. Perry Saturn, ECW TV title, Shane Douglas b. John Cronus Taz b. Sandman, ECW title, Raven b. Scorpio half. May 31st Yokkaichi, Big Japan, Satoru Shiga be Masahiko Kochi, Crusher Takahashi be Yosuke Kobayashi, Axel Rotten be Ichiro Yaguchi, Senbu be Aquarius Street Fight, Mr. Pogo be Seiji Yamakawa, Barbed Wire Board Street Fight, Shoji Nakamaki and Hackmeyers be Yuichi Taniguchi and Kendo Nagasaki. May 31st Deer Park, New York, Universal Superstars of America, LA Gord Curry J. Steele, Duke Snyder be Tony Rambo, Grim Carnage be Nathan Alexander, Italian Sensation be Christopher Michaels, Sunny Beach be Typhoon DQ, Bam Bam Bigelow be Booty Man. May 31st Nagoya Battlerts 630, Naohiro Hoshikawa be Satoshi Yoniyama, Bat be Axe Thunder Otsuka, Katsumi Yujiro be Takeshi Ono, Shuichi Funaki and Daisuke Ikeda be Carl Greco and Yuki Ishikawa, Independent Junior Title, Takamichi no Kubi Minoru Tanaka. May 31st St. Albans, Vermont, Northeastern Wrestling Federation, 150, Andy Ellison be Phil Slayer, Misty Blue be Nasty Sherry, Funny Clown be Judas, Little Louie be King Sleazy, Virgil be Donnie Myers, Demolition Axe be Cousin Luke. May 31st Marrero, Louisiana, Cajun Wrestling Federation, 255, Casey Blaze be Tony Martinelli, Taz, Not Original, be Joe Kane DQ, Carl Fergie be Davey Rich, Al Savage be Dale Wolf, Kevin Northcutt be Tommy Rich. June 1st Philadelphia ECW Arena, ECW 1025 Sellout, Devon Storm be El Puerto Ricano, Rob Van Dam be Mikey Whipwreck half, JT Smith and Little Guido be Bubba Ray Dudley and Devon Dudley DQ half star, Taz be Jason Helton elimination match, Pit Bulls and Tommy Dreamer be Bruise Brothers and Brian Lee. ECW title, Raven be Pitbull number 2, Sandman be Stevie Richards, ECW TV title, Shane Douglas be El Puerto Ricano Dud, ECW TV title, Douglas be Don E. Allen Dud, ECW TV title, Douglas be Storm Dud, ECW TV title, Douglas be Whipwreck Dud, ECW TV title, Pitbull number 2 be Douglas to win title half, ECW tag titles, Eliminators be Gangstas half. June 1st Orlando, Florida, WWF 3651 Bushwhackers be New Rockers Dash, Justin Bradshaw be Barry Horowitz 1/4, Mark Marrow be Hunter Hurst Helmsley 1/4, Davey Boy Smith and Owen Hart be Jake Roberts and Ahmed Johnson DQ, Savio Vega be Steve Austin /34, Johnson be Vader half, WWF tag titles, Godwins be Smoking Guns Core Dud, Undertaker be Mankind half, WWF title, Shawn Michaels be Goldust 1/4. June 1st Takamatsu, New Japan, 1800, V. Yano 4 and El Samurai and Norio Onaga be Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Tokumitsu Ishizawa and Shinjiro Otani, Jerry Lynn be Franz Schumann, Black Tiger be Dean Malenko, Yuji Nagata and Junji Hirata and Riki Choshu be Akitoshi Saito and Kunyaki Kobayashi and Kengo Kimura, Hiroyoshi Tenzan be Osamu Nishimura, Michiyoshi Ohara and Tatsutoshi Goto be Keiji Muto and Tadao Yasuda, Masa Chono and Hiro Saito be Akira Nagami and Shiro Koshinaka, Satoshi Kojima and Kensuke Sasaki and Shinya Hashimoto be Takashi Iizuka and Osamu Kido and Kazuo Yamazaki. June 1st Kawagoe, All Japan, 2600, Misao Inoue be Kentaro Shiga, Manukia Mossman and Brian Diet be Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota be Ryukaku Izumida and Haruka Eigen and Masafuchi. All Asian tag title, Jun Akiyama and Takao Mori beat Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Yoshinari Ogawa 2309, Gary Albright and the Lacrosse be Dan Crawford and Doug Furness, Kena Kobashi and Giant Kimala 2 be Satoru Asako and Mitsuharu Misawa, Steve Williams and Johnny Ace and the Patriot be Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Tomoe Honda. June 1st Nashville, USWA, Cyberpunk Ice be Leon Downs, Punisher D. Bart Sawyer, Miss Texas be Samantha, Flex Cabana be Yoshi Kwan, Death Match, Bill Dundee be Cyberpunk Fire, Chain Match, Brian Christopher and Doug Gilbert be Men on Mission, Strap on Pole Non-Title, Jesse James Armstrong be Jeff Jarrett. June 1st Aizu Wakamatsu, All Japan Women, 1750, Genki Misae be Yuka Shina, Yoshiko Tamura be Yumi Fukawa, Ritomata be Saya Endo, Atsuko Mita and Tomoko Watanabe be Mariko Yoshida and Kaoru Ito, Manami Toyota be Kumiko Maekawa, Yumiko Hata and Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue be Asia Kong and Tashio Yamada and Shaparita Asari. June 1st Tako, Battlerts 320, Hatsumi Yujuda be Satoshi Yoniyama, Taka Michinoku be Naohiro Hoshikawa, Bat be Carl Greco, Shuichi Funaki be Minoru Tanaka, Daisuke Ikeda and Takeshi Ono be Yuki Ishikawa and Axe Thunder Otsuka. June 1, Tokyo Korakuen Hall, LLPW Keiko Aono be Watabe, Toshie Sato be Keiko Aono, Mizuki Endo and Michiko Omukai be Sato and Norio Tano, Sorio Pino and Michiko Nagashima and Eagle Sawai be Carol Midori and Mikiko Futagami and Yasha Kurenai, Shinobu Kandori and Rumi Kazama and Karula be Sonoko Kato and Shikeo Nagashima and Bomber Hikari. June 1, Greensboro, North Carolina, Alternative Championship Wrestling, Manny Fernandez and Brian Bruce and Jammin' Jerry and Rockin' Robbie D. L.A. Wild One and Hot Stuff and Terminators, Ricky Morton and Dave Jericho beat Jackie Fulton and Rick Savage, Pat Friday won Battle Royal, Rick Link be Bo James, Ripley Von Slam be Bad Boy Buck, Mr. Excellent be Lumby Warrior. June 1, Corning, Arkansas, North American All-Star Wrestling, Justin St. John be Ron McClarty, Man Mountain Mike be Bone Crusher I, Charlie Parker be Willie D. Charisma, Giant Warrior and Reggie Montgomery be Parker and Justin St. John, Jerry Lawler be Rocky Mountain Thunder, Colorado Kid be Bone Crusher 2. June 1, Bayou La Battery, Alabama, United Championship Wrestling, 229, El Savage be Snapper, Lord Humongous be Executioner, Joey Barrett be Sexy Boy Busby, Max Payne be Osmosis, Bourbon Street Brawler be Tony Martinelli, Painker Brawler, Savage be Barrett, Savage be Humongous, Chuckles the Clown be Boris Zhukov, Carolina Kid be Moon Dragon, Robert Gibson be Marcel Pringle. June 2, Tokuyama, New Japan 4000, prelim results unavailable, Yuji Nagata and Kensuke Sasaki be Akitoshi Saito and Kunyaki Kobayashi, Takashi Iizuka and Junji Hirata and Riki Chashu be Hiro Saito and Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Masachono Osamu Kido and Kazuo Yamazaki be Osamu Nishimura and Keiji Muto, Tadao Yasuda and Satoshi Kojima and Shinya Hashimoto be Tatsutoshi Goto and Kengo Kimura and Shiro Koshinaka. June 2, Ueda All Japan, 2050 Sellout Monokia Mossman be Kentaro Shiga, Yoshinari Ogawa and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi be Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momoto be Mighty Inoue and Haruka Eigen and Masafuchi, The Lacrosse and the Patriot and Johnny Ace be Masao Inoue and Ryukaku Izumida and Takawa Mori, Steve Williams be Giant Kimala 2, Kiritao and Toshiaki Kawada be Tamon Honda and Kenta Kobashi, Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama and Satoru Asako be Gary Albright and Dan Crawford and Doug Furness. June 2, Tijuana, Norte, California, AAA 4300 Depredator and Genghis Khan and Negro Azteca and Amnesia be X-Men and Thunderbird, not original, DQ half. Los Chacales Uno and Dos and Tres be Los Pandilleros Uno and Dos and Tres Dead, Halloween and Elio del Enfermero and Viernes 13 be Corazon de Leon, Chris Jericho and Leon Negro and Angel Mensahero 1/4, Iowa's light heavyweight title, Mascara Sagrada Jr. be Damien to win title half, Rey Mysterio Jr. and Pero Aguayo won 4 corners match over La Parca and Ultimo Dragon, Pierroth Jr. and Cybernetico and Psychosis and Heavy Metal. June 2, Cookeville, Tennessee, USWA, Cyberpunk Ice be Leon Downs, Flex Cabana, Dwayne Johnson be Punisher, Barry Buchanan, Bart Sawyer be Yoshi Kwan, Cyberpunk Fire be Tony Falk Unified title, Jeff Jarrett be Jesse James Armstrong, Fire 1 Battle Royal. June 2, Nagaoka, Big Japan 1000, Sabu be Hack Myers, Shoji Nakamaki be Yuichi Taniguchi, Street Fight, Mr. Pogo be Seiji Yamakawa, Barbed Wire Board Street Fight, Kendo Nagasaki be Axel Rotten, Sabu 1 Battle Royal. June 3, Asheville, North Carolina, WCW Monday Nitro tapings, 4, 500 thirds, 518 paid, Medusa be Bull Nakano, John Tena be Big Bubba Core Dud, Mang and Barbarian be High Voltage, Not Texas Wrestlers half, Craig Pittman be Disco Inferno half, Steve Regal be Jim Duggan 1/4, Kevin Sullivan be Prince Aokia Dud, Ric Flair and Arnold Anderson be Rock and Roll Express 1/4, WCW title, Giant be Ice Train Dud, Scott Norton be Hugh Morris Dud, WCW tag titles, Sting and Lex Luger NC Rick and Scott Steiner 1/4, Medusa be Akira Hokuto DQ. June 3, Chiba All Japan, 2350 sellout, Mighty Inoue be Manukia Mossman, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Yoshinari Ogawa be Masao Inoue and Takawa Mori, Ryukaku Izumida and Haruka Eigen and Masafuchi be Mitsuo Momoto and Rusher Kimura and Giant Baba, Brian Diet and Lacrosse be Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton, Dan Crawford and Doug Furness be Akira Tao and Kentaro Shiga, Gary Albright and Toshiaki Kawada be Kenta Kobashi and Giant Kimala 2, Steve Williams and Johnny Ace and the Patriot B meet Suharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama and Tamon Honda. June 3, Tokyo Korakuen Hall, War, 1900 sellout. Prelim results unavailable. Osamu Teitoko and Irashibi Yuji Yasurioka and Nobutaka Araya, Nobukazu Hirai and Genichiro Tenryu B Masaaki Mochizuki and Koki Kitahara, Geto and Jado and Hiromichi Fuyukibi Shiryu and Men's Tao and Dick Togo. June 3, Inan, Big Japan, 900 Yuichi Taniguchi v Satoru Shiga, Ichiro Yaguchi b Crusher Takahashi, Aquarius b Masahiko Kochi, Sabu b Hack Myers Deathmatch, Seiji Yamakawa and Kendo Nagasaki b Axel Rotten and Shoji Nakamaki. June 4, Kofu, Big Japan, 1800 Satoru Shiga b Yosuke Kobayashi, Hack Myers b Crusher Takahashi, Aquarius b Masahiko Kochi, Axel Rotten b Ichiro Yaguchi, Street Fight Tornado Match, Shoji Nakamaki and Mr. Pogo b Seiji Yamakawa and Yuichi Taniguchi, Barbed Wire Board Street Fight, Kendo Nagasaki v Sabu Core. Special thanks to James Stanios, Paul Spiegel, James Titus, Pat Hudson, Dominic Valenti, Gary Langevin, Michelle Lunn, Ron Lemieux, Dan Paris, Leonard Brand, Faye Ferguson, Danny Deese, Peggy Watkins, Greg John, Travis Edgeworth, Miguel Perez, John Williams, Tim Whitehead. Japanese Television Rundown. May 18 FMW Special. 1. Super Leather and Headhunters became the first World Six-Man Street Fight champions, beating Horace Boulder and the Gladiator and Hisakatsu Oya in 1919 when Leather pinned Boulder. Match was a total brawl, but mostly a bad brawl. There were some nice spots, including Boulder doing both a plancha and a tape, and Gladiator doing his big dive. They broke a few tables. At one point the Headhunter moonsaulted Boulder on a table, but it didn't break, and then Leather splashed the Hunter through a table. 2. Cactus Jack pinned Wing Kanemura in the King of the Death Matches bout in 1645. This was excellent for what it was supposed to be. They had a spider net barbed wire board on the floor with broken glass underneath, and most of the match was teasing and taking bumps into it. After Kanemura took a bump into it, Jack came off the apron with an elbow drop with a chair onto him on it. Both guys juiced heavy from bumping into the barbed wire. Kanemura planches Jack into the spider net and gave Jack a Northern Lights suplex onto barbed wire. It wound up with broken glass all over the ring and them taking bumps in it for near falls until Jack DDT'd Kanemura on barbed wire. 3. Kamikaze, Yuki Ishikawa, and Shooter and Katsutoshi Niyama beat Daisuke Ikeda and Shoichi Funaki and Tetsuhiro Kuroda in 1437 when Niyama pinned Shooter with a urinage. The guys worked hard, but they are mostly real green. 3/4. 4. Shaparita Asari and Yumi Fukawa beat Aki Kanbayashi and Kaori Nakayama in 12 minutes when Asari pinned Kanbayashi with a Sky Twister press. Asari is leagues above the other three. Actually, the two FMW women were pretty bad. 5. Megumi Kudo beat Combat Toyota in the first women's explosive barbed wire match in 21-26. Both bladed their arms and took bumps into the barbed wire and were blown up. The climax was Toyota German suplexing Kudo into the barbed wire, and both took the bomb. They went to several near falls before Kudo won with a reverse gory special bomb. Both collapsed after the match. A frantic Atsushi Onita hit the ring and began pouring water on both in an attempt to revive them. Kudo did a stretcher job while combat was carried out by Onita. A good spectacle and a solid but unspectacular match. AAA. They held a TV taping on June 2 in Tijuana before 4,300, which was said to have been a hot show from start to finish with the exception of one bad match. In the top bouts, Halloween and El Hijo del Enfermero and Viernes 13, Friday the 13th, beat Corazon de Leon, Chris Jericho making his AAA debut, and Leon Negro and Angel Mensajero in 21:05. Jericho was said to have been great and Halloween good, but Viernes was god-awful. Halloween pinned Jericho clean in the third fall, and Pero Russo and Los Pandilleros did a run-in, and it was 7-on-3 by the heels who left all the faces laying. Match was said to have been okay, but the angle was said to have been excellent. Then Mascara Sagrada Jr. won the Iowa's light heavyweight title from Damien in a match with incredible heat, with a pop for the finish described as similar to when Rey Mysterio Jr. beat Psicosis for the World Welterweight title last year, which was equivalent to the pop when Sting beat Flair for the title for the first time in 1990. In the second fall, Damien accidentally gave the ref a Copo kick, knocking him out. So heel ref Durantes ran in to replace him and did the slow count and fast count business. Damien won the second fall. In the third fall, Damien got a kendo stick and used it both on Sagrada Jr. and on his father, who was at ringside, before accidentally going to Rontes with it. At this point, Los Pandilleros and Pero Russo did a run-in. The X-Men, underneath babyface trio, came in and did a save complete with a triple top ace spot. It wound up with Heenan, who was suspended in Tijuana from wrestling, doing a run-in with Rey Mysterio Jr. Sagrada Jr., who was from Tijuana, did all kinds of flying moves and finally got the pin to win the title. Main event was a four corners tag match with Mysterio Jr. and Pero Aguayo, La Parca, and Ultimo Dragon, Pierroth Jr. and Cibernetico and Heavy Metal and Psicosis as the teams. Psicosis wore a ring outfit with CMLL in a circle and a slash similar to the Ghostbusters insignia. Match was said to have been excellent. At the 20:31 mark, everyone had been pinned except Mysterio Jr. and Psicosis, and they went at it for 7-10, doing one great spot after another. A lot of fans left while this was going on for whatever reason. At one point, Psicosis was ready to superplex Mysterio Jr. and Mysterio Jr. reversed it and flipped Psicosis backwards, and he took the suplex from the top rope to the floor and lived to tell about it. It ended up with a Psicosis splash mountain reversed into a Frankensteiner finish with Mysterio Jr. going over. All Japan. A quiet week leading up to the Budokan Hall show on June 7th. The big push was for the tag team title match with Steve Williams and Johnny Ace challenging new champs Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama. On May 28 in Hanamaki, Williams and Ace beat Akiyama and Takao Mori, who hold the All-Asian Tag titles, in a non-title match where Williams pinned Akiyama. Akiyama holds all three tag titles in this promotion, the PWF World and International belts with Misawa and the Asian belts as well, which I'm nearly certain is a historical first. On June 1st in Kawagoe, Akiyama and Omori retained their All-Asian belts beating Yoshinari Ogawa and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi in 23:09. It is believed that if Misawa and Akiyama keep the belts on June 7th, that Akiyama would relinquish his half of the Asian belts. A newcomer to Japan getting a little push is Brian Diet, who is from Denver and is a protege of Steve Williams, and is now being trained by Giant Baba in Japan. Diet worked a few shows at the Dallas Sportatorium under a different name as Williams' tag partner, and he did his tune-up bouts there getting ready for the return to All Japan. Diet and Manukia Mossman have formed an underneath tag combo that beat the Fantastics but lost to Dan Crawford and Doug Furness, and on May 30th, he was put in the semifinal teaming with Gary Albright and Giant Kimala 2, losing to Williams and Patriot and Ace. Apparently Diet is slightly larger than Patriot and is good looking because the idea is to get him to the point where he could be Kobashi's regular tag team partner as a heartthrob American/Japanese combination similar to Kobashi's team with Ace a few years ago. That won't be easy in the promotion where the work rate on top is the best in the world and having big plans for a guy who has only had about 10 pro matches to this point. May 26th TV show, which was the tag title switch with Misawa and Akiyama over Akira Tao and Toshiaki Kawada, drew a 2.0 rating. New Japan. We don't have complete results from the past week, but as of June 4th, the standings in the top of the Super Junior tournament saw El Samurai and Wild Pegasus both tied with 4 points. Samurai pinned Pegasus in their round-robin meeting on May 28 in Nagano, in the A block, while Black Tiger and Shinjiro Otani with 4 points are tied for tops in the B block. Jushin Liger has 3 points in Group B. Emilio Charles Jr. is out of the tournament as he suffered a broken shoulder on May 30th in Takaoka during a tag match with Villano 4 against Jerry Lynn and El Samurai. There's probably a very logical explanation, and I guess it has to do with stiffness, but with all the crazy spots Mexican wrestlers do in their own country and while they get banged up all the time, they seem to get hurt far worse when in Japan. Satoshi Kojima, with a 2-0 record, is leading in the 4-man tournament. Others are Michiyoshi Ohara with a 1-0 record, Hiroyoshi Tenzan with a 1-2 record, and Osamu Nishimura at 0-2, to determine who gets the next shot at Shinya Hashimoto's IWGP title on June 11th in Hiroshima. Dan Severn is expected to debut during the 5 nights at Sumo Hall in August, perhaps winding up with a singles match against either Keiji Muto or Hashimoto. Added to the Rikidozan Memorial Show on June 30th in Yokohama is Koji Kiao and Masaaki Mochizuki vs. Geto and Hiromichi Fuyuki. Speaking of Kiao, his comments regarding UFC were that he considered it similar to a high school playground fight, and that since when in a playground fight do they pull the guy on top off the other guy and say he lost because he had a bloody nose. There has been talk of doing a UFC match in Japan in July between Kiao and Emmanuel Yarborough, the 6'8", 620-pound guy that lost to Keith Hackney in UFC 3 in the clip that had been shown 2 million times. At a TV taping on May 28 in Nagano, they did an angle where Masa Chono tore to bits a copy of Tokyo Sports right in front of the paper's editor who was at ringside. May 25 TV did a 1.9 rating. Other Japan notes. The next Pancrase show is June 25th in Fukuoka with Ken Shamrock vs Masakatsu Funaki, Boss Rutan vs Jason DeLucia, Ryushi Yanagisawa vs Takaku Fuke, Minoru Suzuki vs Yuki Kondo, Manabu Yamada vs Yoshiki Takahashi, Guy Mezger vs Asami Shibuya, and Takafumi Ito vs Kyuma Kunyoku. War's Koki Kitahara, who was in Kyao's corner at the last UFC, now wants to compete in UFC. The Genichiro Tenryu vs Nobuhiko Takada match, which was originally set for July during a two-night sumo hall deal, may be moved to the fall. It appears Tenryu vs Yoji Anjo will take place as one of the main events at Sumo Hall. It appears they are doing an angle where Tatsuo Nakano has quit UFI and will be joining War. Tokyo Pro Wrestling is holding a loser leaves the promotion match between Abdullah the Butcher vs Mr. Pogo on June 24th at Korakuen Hall, with all foreign objects given to the wrestlers by fans legal to use. The winner gets to pick a partner and challenge Anjo and Takashi Ishikawa for the tag titles. Butcher will win and form a tag team with Billy Black most likely. Rings ran a show on May 25th in Ekaterinburg, Russia before 6,570 fans, with Russia's Nikolai Zuev beating Willie Williams from the US in the main event and Yoshihisa Yamamoto over Bitsaid Ramaji. Bart Vale worked the show, putting over Andrei Kopylov of Russia. The Gladiator Mike Alfonso regained the FMW World Brass Knucks Championship, beating Super Leather Mike Kirchner on May 27th in Hakata. They're building the company around Masato Tanaka as the top babyface, as he won a street fight over Mr. Pogo in the main event. FMW announced that they had a company meeting and would be firing Hayabusa, which sounds like an angle, but if not, then expect him in New Japan soon. Battlerts ran 3 shows over the weekend, with the top show on May 31st in Nagoya before 630 fans, with Taka Michinoku keeping the independent junior title, beating Minoru Tanaka. Big Japan finished its latest tour on June 4th in Kofu with a barbed wire board street fight match where Kendo Nagasaki beating Sabu via count out in a double juice match. War ran an interpromotional main event on June 3rd at Korakuen Hall with War's Gedo and Jado and Hiromichi Fuyuki beating Michinoku's men's Tao and Dick Togo and Shiryu in 21:50. Aswa. Brian Christopher won the Aswa title from Jerry Lawler on the June 1st live TV show in Memphis. The show started with a battle royal where the winner would face Lawler for the title later in the show. It came down to Christopher and the Punisher, WWF's Barry Buchanan, here to gain experience, former SMW wrestler. Punisher got the pin and ref Downtown Bruno counted to 3, and then ruled that pins don't count in a battle royal, obviously done as a spoof on Page at the last WCW PPV show. As Punisher raised his arm in victory, Christopher dropkicked him over the top rope. Lawler did the announcing with Lance Russell and at this point was acting like a babyface, doing a lot of comedy. When Punisher came to Russell to complain about the finish, Lawler sided with him, saying he was robbed. Lawler also talked with Bruno and told Bruno that since the two of them are good friends, he tried to get Bruno to favor him in their title match later in the show. Bruno said that everyone liked the way he was refereeing and he was going to continue to call things down the line. Lawler did another interview making reference to a show he worked for Burt Prentice in Arkansas and said that everyone at the show was asking him if he was kin to Christopher, the first time this has ever been brought up on Memphis television, as Lawler has always wanted to keep quiet being Christopher's father because it would give away that he's old enough to have a son in his mid-20s. His response was that everyone in wrestling isn't kin to each other, unlike everyone in Arkansas. During the match with Christopher, of course Lawler and Bruno were arguing throughout. Lawler used his fist drop but Christopher made it to the ropes. Lawler got mad at Bruno again and shoved him down. As Bruno got up and the two argued, Christopher snuck up from behind Lawler and Bruno shoved him over him and counted the fall on him for the title switch. As Christopher was doing his post-match interview, Punisher attacked him. JC Ice is leaving for Puerto Rico. To set this up, they are doing a loser of the fall leaves town on June 5th in Helena, Arkansas with Lawler and Bill Dundee versus Cyberpunks. Jesse James Armstrong is also leaving for CWA in Austria and on June 10th in Memphis has a loser leaves town match against Jeff Jarrett. They still have a heel fan in the front row at TV heckling the faces. Also new in the area are Ashley Hudson from Australia, billed as a protege of Dundee, Rocky Mountain Thunder, the huge worthless guy who worked Awa about 7 years ago, and Bart Sawyer. Doug Gilbert has also returned from Japan. ECW. Although there were some memorable highlights such as Brian Pillman, Prostitute Divine Brown of Hugh Grant fame, and UFC's Paul Verlins doing angles, overall the June 1st ECW Arena show was regarded as a lackluster show highlighted by a strong angle with Verlins versus Taz. The show started strong but fizzled as it went on, Perhaps because of backstage tension when New Jack went off on Pillman in what everyone who saw it swore was unplanned and I'm told was a shoot, but it appears almost nobody in the outside world, since it involves a Paul Heyman show and Pillman believes anything involving them could be legit. Crowd was estimated at 1,025 with 2 sets of bleachers no longer there but the building full. During a match with Rob Van Dam versus Mikey Whipwreck, Pillman, who looked to be about 180 pounds with his face still swollen from the Humvee wreck, came out in a wheelchair and challenged Whipwreck, who slapped him in the face. Pillman wound up hitting Whipwreck with his crutch and Van Dam pinned him. After the match, Pillman did a TV interview running down ECW and its fans. I've heard different versions as to what he actually said, one version that he called the Gangstas niggers with attitudes and the other that he referred to the rap group with the same name and said the Gangstas have done for wrestling what NWA has done for rap music. Either way, New Jack was listening and apparently went nuts backstage in front of nobody but the wrestlers and confronted Pillman, and when people tried to explain that Pillman talked about the rap group and he wasn't calling them racial names, he wouldn't listen. It wound up with about 10 minutes of extreme tension backstage, New Jack at one point quitting and getting ready to walk out, telling Mustafa to come with him, Mustafa apologizing to Pillman for what was going on and indicating he wasn't going to walk out with New Jack. Heyman went crazy telling New Jack he's blowing his last chance with the company if he walks out and no-shows the main event. A compromise was then worked out, but this sounds just too weird, where New Jack agreed to come back and work the main event if he could do an interview in front of the fans about Pillman, and for some reason Heyman agreed, which turned out to be a mistake because it wound up killing the main event. It sure reads like an angle, though. Back to the real show, JT Smith and Little Guido beat Bubba Ray Dudley and Devon Dudley, and afterwards Devon destroyed all his brothers with chairs until Big Dick Dudley showed up to a surprisingly big pop. Match itself was terrible, falling apart when Devon slipped off the middle rope. Stevie Richards came out and said he found a woman slutty enough to be Raven's whore and introduced Divine Brown. The angle was ruined when Brown tried to walk across the ring in exceedingly high heels and kept slipping and was laughing as the angle was going on. Raven said she wasn't slutty enough and hadn't slept with enough people. Rumor has it that Raven will keep turning down women saying they aren't slutty enough, but finally wind up with Sandman's wife Peaches as his new whore to set up a feud between the two. Taz then beat Jason Helton of Calgary in what was billed as a shoot fight, which was short and entertaining, winning via choke. Joey Styles did an interview as Taz challenged anyone to come out. Styles said they had someone there who would accept his challenge, and Taz said he's been waiting for Sabu, who was in Japan. Styles said it wasn't Sabu, and Paul Verlins of UFC came to the ring and they did several pull-aparts which got great heat, with Taz telling him that UFC sucks. Apparently everyone loved Verlins, who debuts as a pro wrestler for ECW on June 8 in Reading, Pennsylvania. They had a 6-man elimination bout where the winner would get a shot at Raven's title, with Pit Bulls and Tommy Dreamer beating Bruise Brothers and Brian Lee. At one point Lee choke slammed Dreamer off the stage onto and through 3 tables. Pitbull number 2 ended up pinning one of the Bruise Brothers to win in what was said to have been the best match on the show, and was then jumped by Raven, who won a short match and juiced heavy during the match. Paul Heyman then came out and announced Sabu vs. Van Dam on June 22, and said the next 90 minutes was going to be so wild that if it wasn't, he guaranteed Divine Brown would give the fans free blow jobs in the parking lot after the match. Geez, it's bad enough they make their product too sleazy for kids, not they make newsletters too sleazy for kids to read by reporting on it. Richards and Blue Meanie came out as the Blue Meanie Bloods, with Richards saying his name was Lord Stephen Richards and the other guy was Sir Meanie. Richards served papers on Missy Hyatt. A doctor came out and ordered Sandman not to wrestle, calling him by his real name of Jim Fullington. Hyatt then started making out with the doctor, who allows Sandman to wrestle. Richards quickly got Sandman in the figure 4, but Sandman got out and caned Richards and pinned him in a quick match. New Jack did an interview asking why ECW brought in guys from WCW like Pillman that were calling him racial names when they were told to leave their racism in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and they said they were told no racism would be tolerated in ECW. New Jack then said this isn't from New Jack, this is from Jerome Young, New Jack's real name, which again sounds like a Heyman angle, and said that Pillman and Tom Zenk were caught in homosexual acts. He was more descriptive, in the showers in WCW, and he then started running down WWF. WCW, Gangstas in Paradise, Z Gangsta, etc. 2 Cold Scorpio was scheduled to regain the TV title from Shane Douglas, but he had a legit staph infection and couldn't work. This was announced at the beginning of the show and refunds were offered. Douglas demanded a match and proceeded to beat in quick succession El Puerto Ricano, Don E. Allen, Devin Storm, and Whipwreck. Several wrestlers came to clean up the ring, included Pitbull number 2, and Douglas challenged him, calling him Anthony, his real name. This is turning into a pattern, and said he wanted a shoot. Douglas then started calling Francine the biggest whore in ECW and she slapped him. He then gave her a belly-to-belly suplex and Pitbull number 2 hit the ring. It started strong, but as they started wrestling on the mat, the crowd got restless with boring and "where's our blowjobs" chants. Pitbull number 2 won the TV title in an upset, turning an attempt at a Frankensteiner off the top into a super bomb. Eliminators beat Gangstas in a disappointing main event that lacked heat. It was good when they were outside the ring, including New Jack Powerbomb Cronus in a pickup truck, but it was dead in the ring. The Gangstas in Paradise, Samula and Matthew Anoya, just recently fired by WWF, interfered. Saturn bled from reopening a bad cut from the previous night. Gangstas in Paradise attacked Gangstas in another dead angle. Heyman blamed the interview the Gangstas did before the match with killing the heat in the main event. Pitbull number 1 will be out for 2 months with a torn bicep. Former boxer Randy Tex Cobb was at the show. The other weekend show was May 31st in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania, before 325 fans. Scorpio won a battle royal to get a shot at Raven's title, which he lost. The rest of the matches were based on order of elimination. Bad Crew number 1 faced number 2 when Damian Kane interfered, so number 1 won, then both crew members went after Kane and Storm made the save. Don Harris pinned Ron Harris in a terrible match, or was it the other way around? Ron actually won, then the ref raised Don's hand and he was announced as the winner. In a match against Pitbull number 2, Perry Saturn tried an Aussie moonsault but wound up landing head first on the floor and busted himself open really bad. Douglas beat Cronus next with Saturn, all bandaged up, coming out to help. Saturn was bleeding like crazy through the bandages. Taz beat Sandman. Sandman's knee was in bad shape and he really couldn't work, and Todd Gordon told him he wasn't going to let him wrestle. Hyatt then started making out with Gordon and he let him wrestle. Gordon threw in the towel for Sandman when he was being choked out. They are apparently going to do a Sandman and Missy vs. Taz and Bill Alfonso match on June 21st. Raven juiced like crazy again in his title match with Scorpio. June 22nd at ECW Arena has Sabu vs. Van Dam, Taz vs. Verlin, Streamer vs. Brian Lee with all weapons legal, and Pitbull number 2 defending the TV title against Douglas. June 8th in Reading, Pennsylvania has Eliminators defending against Gangstas, Raven vs. Sandman, Pitbull number 2 vs. Douglas, Dreamer vs. Lee. Falls count anywhere. A balcony is scheduled to be in the ECW Arena to increase capacity in the fall, here and there. The 163-pounder on the U.S. Olympic team in Greco-Roman wrestling for Atlanta is Gordy Morgan, who is the nephew of Red Bastian. Morgan won the final qualifications for the Olympics on June 2nd in Concord, CA. The second World Freestyle Fighting Championships, a UFC knockoff that's legal in Oklahoma unlike UFC because they mandate gloves and don't allow as much time fighting on the ground, which are naturally rules to make things more dangerous, but politicians who are ignorant think otherwise, take place June 8th in Oklahoma City. Guy Mesger from Pancrase and John Dixon, who placed second in a UFC-like tournament a few months back in Russia, are the favorites. Cleveland All-Pro Wrestling on June 14th in Lakewood, Ohio, and June 15th and June 16th in Cleveland has Ricky Morton, Bruiser Bedlam, Jimmy Valiant, and Bobby Blaze. For more info, call 216-476-1357. There's far less to the story of the Awa returning than meets the eye. Apparently it was more wishful thinking by someone trying to use the Awa name to sell shows than a return of the promotion. Dennis Corralizzo has a show on June 14th in West Deptford, New Jersey with Brian Christopher vs. Doug Gilbert, Dan Severn vs. Geza Coleman Jr., Jimmy Snuka vs. Metal Maniac, and Skip will debut his new manager for a test run on the show. Former pro wrestler George Temple, who wrestled in the 50s in Southern California, passed away this past week. Temple is better known as the older brother of Shirley Temple, and apparently Shirley Temple in her heyday always tried to keep it quiet and was embarrassed by the fact her older brother was a wrestler. MUFA has shows June 22nd in College Park, Maryland at the Community Center with Nikolai Volkov, Doink the Clown, and Jimmy Snuka, and has Axel Rotten and Johnny Gunn on a show June 30th in Dundalk, Maryland at the Teamsters Hall. Among the wrestlers who appeared on May 31st in Compton, California were Blue Panther, Hector Garza, Silver King, Grand Marcus Jr., and Dr. Wagner Jr. Most of the same group also worked June 2nd in Los Angeles at All Nations Center. Billy Graham will make an appearance for Billy Anderson's show on June 9th in San Bernardino, California at the Boys and Girls Club to sign free autographs. Graham will be in town for a major religious play about his wrestling career on June 11th in Los Angeles at the International Church. WCW. There is a good chance the June 7th show in Buffalo, New York will set the all-time company gate record. As of 4 days before the show, they had 8,031 tickets sold for $151,748. The all-time company gate record is about $190,000 for the 1989 Flair vs. Funk match at the Great American Bash in Baltimore. WCW actually co-promoted When Worlds Collide in Los Angeles in 1994, which did $202,000, but that didn't involve WCW talent on the show. Despite Eric Bischoff on the air talking about going to the new Buffalo Arena, at this point they haven't been allowed in. Bischoff said it as a way to put pressure on the building to give them a date. Nitro on June 3 in Asheville, North Carolina before 4,500 fans, 3,518 paying $44,360, was better paced and the announcing wasn't nearly as bad as the first 2-hour edition, but there was no good wrestling at all. John Tenta beat Big Bubba via countout in 104 when Tenta got Bubba scissors and Bubba let DUD. Meng and Barbarian beat Ruckus and Chaos in 323. Ruckus and Chaos are from the power plant. Two more guys who are prime examples of what you two can do with your body with drug-free hard training. Both were really green. Ruckus showed potential, but Chaos wasn't ready to be in the ring yet. Meng and Barbarian looked a lot better than they have in a long time. Craig Pittman beat Disco Inferno when Disco submitted before Pittman even got the armbreaker on. Marco Ruiz/Remco Pardoll UFC finish half. Steve Regal beat Jim Duggan with a roll-up using trunks after Duggan KO'd Bobby Eaton with his taped fist in 421. 1/4. Kevin Sullivan pinned Prince Iaukea, who is not Rocky Iaukea but does look like a younger version of him, so could possibly be a younger brother, in 122 DUD. Ric Flair and Arnold Anderson beat Rock and Roll Express in 1859 when Anderson DDT'd Gibson after Woman raked his eyes and Flair then pinned him. Terribly disappointing considering the talent involved. Morton and Gibson really showed their age, looking way too old for their style and gimmick. I've always thought Ricky looked 10 years younger than he really was. But he looked every bit of 39 in the ring, and Robert, who is 38, looked older than Ricky. Some parts had strong heat since this was Rander's stomping grounds, but Morton and Gibson don't have it anymore. 1/4. Bobby Heenan did a great promo announcing he'd coach Flair and Anderson in Baltimore, and it wound up with Savage doing a phone interview later saying he'd be in Steve McMichael and Kevin Green's corner. Giant pinned Ice Train in 27 with a choke slam. Scott Norton came out and was choke slammed twice. Giant challenged Hulk Hogan, who they kept hyping throughout the show. Hugh Morris came out for a match with a out-cold Norton and beat him up a while, and then was supposed to miss a moonsault and get pinned, or Norton was supposed to catch his moonsault block in midair and power slam him for the pin. Anyway, neither happened, so Norton pinned him in a finish that made no sense. Sting and Lex Luger and Steiner's when Giant came out and choke-slammed Rick in a very sloppy choke slam on the floor, and then Luger, Sting and Scott worked together to knock Giant out of the ring. 2 Brian Pillman posters made it onto TV and they were confiscated immediately. Medusa beat Bull Nakano with a German suplex in a match taped for Main Event, and then Medusa beat Akira Hokuto via DQ when Bull interfered in another match for Main Event. Both matches were short and nothing special, but they were the best matches on the show. Steve Dahl was all banged up in his match against Mike Enos last week. Max injured his knee but will be back this week. May 29th WCW Saturday Night Tapings in Dalton, Georgia drew 1,300 paying $6,000. Main stuff was Flair and Anderson over Scott and Steve Armstrong. Males beat Kurosawa and Pat Tanaka in a match highlighted by Kurosawa missing a super kick by 2 feet and Tanaka selling it big anyway. Gene Okerlund interviewed Shark, who said his name was John Tenda and he wasn't a fish. Then he and Bubba did a double count out. Norton and Ice Train beat Bobby Eaton and David Taylor, and Sting beat Johnny Grunge. TV ratings for the weekend of May 25th saw Saturday Night do a 2.0 and Pro a 1.1 while Main Event was preempted. For June 1st, Saturday Night did a 2.4, Main Event a 1.6 and Pro a 1.0. For the week ending May 19th, the total audience for all WCW programming was 4.97 million homes on 183 stations, and for WWF was 4.49 million homes on 163 stations. Kevin Green was on Jay Leno on May 28th. Green lost all his charisma when he cut his hair. It was good for WCW to get the exposure, but Green wasn't good at all on TV, particularly calling Flair Pretty Boy Ric Flair and doing an embarrassing promo. Leno made a joke in his monologue about the sumo scandal. An ex-sumo of the 60s revealed mob tie-ins and fixed matches, and said how glad he was that in America how nobody would ever accuse our pro wrestling have fixing matches, and mentioned the names Chief Jay Strongbow and Professor Tanaka. Within a 15 minutes period on the May 25th worldwide show saw Bobby Heenan announce a match with Sting and Luger versus Steiners. In other words, On May 27, Nitro, when talking about how Sting and Scott had probably never wrestled each other in either singles or tags, he had just done a voiceover 5 days earlier for this match. Savage worked on the show with no mention of his suspension from television, and a match with Jushin Liger and Kensuke Sasaki as a tag team. Both Heenan and Tony Schiavone brought up that Sasaki had recently broken Hawk's arm. Wasn't it Kurosawa? But I recognize that they all look alike. And when Sasaki used a Northern Lights bomb, Schiavone called it a revolutionary move never seen before in WCW, forgetting that Sasaki and Akira Hokuto used the move numerous times in WCW when they came at the end of 1995. 1 week later, Heenan started talking about Rey Mysterio Jr., or in WCW, Rey Mysterio Jr., saying he's heard so much about him but had never seen him and knew he was from Mexico, and asked Schiavone if he was one of those Mexican wrestlers who wore a mask, and Schiavone responded, "No." Bischoff offered a deal to Chris Jericho, seeing him at the Peace Festival, also talked with Bam Bam Bigelow, although Bigelow can't come in for several months because he's still under contract to WWF. Bischoff wanted to use Jericho full-time. As of June 4th, they had still not even booked a card for the June 10th Nitro, which shows how far in advance booking is being done. Some talk that Ted DiBiase will be brought in with the gimmick name of Zillionaire Ted. WWF. Jim Neidhart debuts with a new gimmick on June 23rd. The spot where Goldust ran over Roddy Piper at WrestleMania with the car was done by Piper and not a stuntman. Jim Ross handled the announcing for the Make Good Hour of the Beware of Dog PPV on May 28 and did the best job of announcing of anyone on a WWF or WCW PPV show in a long time. He was really fired up after months on the sidelines, and even having to carry Kurt Hennig as a crutch couldn't slow him down. Shawn Michaels apologized to a few wrestlers for not having his priorities straight in regard to the deal at the last Madison Square Garden show, where he, Diesel, Razor Ramon and Hunter Hearst Helmsley did the curtain call. Ultimate Warrior missed the weekend shows because he either pulled or had a slight tear in his shoulder or trap. No word on when he'll be back. Ahmed Johnson replaced him at all the house shows and beat Vader with the Pearl River Plunge in less than 5 minutes most nights. Coming off the angle on May 27, Johnson was over bigger than ever. He's now being groomed to be the company's number 2 babyface behind only Michaels, since Undertaker is more of an attraction gimmick and Warrior is being booked the same way, since he'll lose steam as time goes on. Last week's houses, with Michaels, Goldust, Warrior, not there, Vader, Undertaker, Mankind as the headline attractions, were May 28 TV in North Charleston, South Carolina drew 3,435, paying $43,977. May 29 in Savannah, Georgia drew 2,645, paying $36,512. May 30 in West Palm Beach drew a sellout 4,777, paying $64,889. May 31 in Tampa drew 2,763, paying $49,928, and June 1 in Orlando drew 3,651, paying $63,701. The May 27 Raw taping in Fayetteville, North Carolina drew the largest gross ever for wrestling in that city, which is saying something since that city has a big wrestling history from the Crockett days. The Gangsters in Paradise are already gone. Samu was going to be suspended for violating a company policy, and it wound up with Samu and Matthew both quitting. Austin did a TV interview over the weekend basically saying that he wasn't trying hard to beat Savio Vega in the strap match because he was happy to get rid of DiBiase as excess baggage. The interview made no sense since it was such a heated match, and the way the match went made the idea he wasn't trying to win make no sense. For all real purposes, the clique is now done. The Body Donnas appear to be turning babyface and getting a new manager, and will feud with the Guns managed by Sonny. They are asking fans to send them ideas for a new manager. The new manager will be tried out on an NWA indie show on June 14th. Chicago on June 9th is going to do huge business as the advance is more than $150,000. Bob Holly may be leaving. Ratings for the weekend of May 25th saw Action Zone at 1.6 and Mania at 1.1. For June 1st saw Action Zone at 2.2, with a whopping 7.1 share, and Mania at 1.1. This is the end of this conversion. Be sure to comment and subscribe. See you next time.